dead of night, when the world holds its breath, a bell rings from a forgotten grave, its chime a whisper from the void. It's not a call for rescue, it's a summons for something ancient, something hungry, watching from beyond the stars. Will you answer, or will the darkness claim you first? Chapter 1. The Awakening. Echo in. The quiet town of Eldridge, where mist clung to the hills like a shroud, stood an old graveyard. It was the kind of place folks whispered about after dark. Tall iron gates creaked in the wind, and crooked stones marked graves from long ago. No one went there much except for old man Harlan, the caretaker. He was a thin fellow with eyes like foggy glass, always muttering about the past. The graveyard had a story that everyone knew but no one liked to tell. Back in the old days, when cholera swept through like a thief in the night, people feared being buried alive. Doctors weren't sure about death sometimes, so they made safety coffins. These had a bell on top, tied to a string that went down into the box. If you woke up 6 feet under, you could pull the string and ring for help. One grave stood out. It belonged to Elias Thorne, a rich man who died 100 years back. His stone was big and black, carved with strange shapes that looked like twisted stars. The bell on his grave was rusty but still there, hanging from a post like a warning. Folks said Elias was scared of the dark more than most. He paid extra for that bell, thinking it would save him if the Reaper came too soon. Young Sarah lived on the edge of town. She was 16, with hair like autumn leaves and a mind full of questions. Her pa died when she was small, and her ma worked long hours at the mill. Sarah spent her days reading books from the library, tales of ghosts and far-off places. But lately, her dreams turned bad. She saw vast emptiness, like the sky but deeper, with things moving in the shadows. Things with too many eyes and voices that whispered secrets she couldn't grasp. One rainy night, Sarah couldn't sleep. Thunder shook the windows, and the wind howled like a lost soul. She slipped out of bed, threw on her coat, and wandered to the graveyard. Why? She didn't know. It felt like something pulled her there, like a thread tied to her heart. The gate was open, swinging gently. Sarah stepped inside, her boots squishing in the mud. The air smelled of wet earth and decay. She walked past rows of stones until she reached Elias Thorne's grave. The bell hung still, drops of rain sliding off its edge. Then it rang, a soft ting at first, like a spoon on glass. Sarah froze. Her heart pounded. Was it the wind? No, the air was calm now. Another ring, louder. Ting, ting. She backed away, but her feet felt heavy. The ground seemed to shift under her, like it breathed. The bell rang again, frantic now. Ting, ting, ting. Sarah ran. She dashed through the gate and didn't stop until she reached home. Breathless, she slammed the door and leaned against it. Her ma was asleep, so she said nothing. But that night, the dreams came worse. She saw Elias Thorne, not as a man, but as something else. His body twisted in the coffin, but it wasn't him pulling the string. Something inside him, something old and hungry, reached out. The next day, Sarah went back. She had to know. The sun peeked through clouds, but the graveyard felt colder. Harlan was there, sweeping leaves. "What you doing here, girl?" he grumbled. "I heard the bell last night," she said. On Thorne's grave. Harlan's eyes widened. He dropped his broom. "Ain't possible. That bell's been silent for years. Wind must have tricked you." But Sarah knew better. She waited until Harlan left, then crept to the grave. The bell looked the same, but the ground around it was loose, like fresh dirt. She knelt and touched the soil. It was warm, pulsing faintly. That evening, the town buzzed. Old Mrs. Finch said her cat went missing. Farmer Jed found his cows dead, drained dry. Whispers spread, something stirred. Sarah's dreams grew clearer. She saw stars that weren't stars, swirling voids where God slept. Elias Thorne had found a book in his travels, a forbidden tome with pages of black ink that moved like shadows. He read it, seeking power over death. But the book woke something, a being from beyond, vast and uncaring. It slipped into his mind, then his body. When he died, it waited in the coffin, patient as time. The bell was its call. Not for help, but to summon more, to open a door. Sarah told no one. Who would believe? But she felt it pulling her, like the thread again. That night, she returned to the graveyard with a shovel from her pa's shed. The moon was full, casting silver light on the stones. She dug. The earth came up easy, too easy. Hours passed, her arms aching, blisters forming. Finally, the shovel hit wood. The coffin lid was cracked, splintered from inside. She pried it open. Inside lay Elias, or what was left. His skin was pale, eyes open but empty. But something moved in his chest, a writhing mass like tentacles in ink. The bell rang above, loud and clear. Sarah screamed as the thing rose, filling the air with a smell of ozone and rot. It wasn't of this world. It came from places where light died, where madness ruled. She ran, but the ground shook. Trees bent, sky twisted. The town woke to screams. Lights flickered on, people rushed out, but it was too late. The being spread, a shadow across the stars. Sarah hid in her house, but she knew. The bell had rung, and the door was open. Humanity was small, a speck in the void, and the void looked back, hungry. In the days that followed, Eldridge changed. People vanished, or worse, returned different. Eyes glazed, whispering in tongues no one knew. Sarah tried to fight, burning the book she found in Thorne's old house. But the words lingered in her mind, etching madness. One night, she stood by the grave again. The bell was silent now. She felt the pull, the whisper. "Join us," it said. "See the truth." She climbed down, lay in the coffin. The lid closed on its own. Darkness wrapped her, but in that dark, she saw everything, the cosmos, endless, uncaring. God slumbered in depths, waiting. The bell rang once more, not for her, but for the next. Chapter 2. The Eternal Toll. The moors stretched endless under a sky heavy with clouds, a bleak expanse where the wind sang of forgotten things. In the heart of this desolate land stood Blackthorn Castle, its spires clawing at the heavens like broken fingers. The stone was old, worn smooth by centuries of rain and sorrow. Ivy clung to its walls, hiding cracks that whispered secrets. Inside, Lady Elara wandered, a ghost in her own home. Elara was 32, with hair black as midnight and eyes that held too much grief. Her husband, Lord Victor, had been dead 5 years, taken by a fever that burned through him in days. She remembered his laugh, rich and warm, and how it filled the castle's halls. Now silence ruled. The servants moved like shadows, and the portraits on the walls seemed to watch her, their painted eyes cold. The castle wasn't always hers. She came from a small village, daughter of a baker, until Victor saw her at a market fair and chose her. The townsfolk called it a fairy tale, but fairy tales don't end with empty beds and sleepless nights. Victor had been kind, but he feared death more than most. He spoke of it often, late at night, his voice low. "What if I'm trapped? Elara, buried alive, clawing at wood, no one to hear?" So he had a safety coffin built with a bell above his grave in the family crypt. A string ran through the earth, tied to his wrist. One pull, and the bell would ring, calling for rescue. 5 years ago, the bell stayed silent. Elara visited the crypt daily, sitting by his tomb, waiting for a sound that never came. Time dulled the pain, but not the loneliness. The moors felt alive some nights, whispering through the castle's cracks, telling her she wasn't alone. She ignored it, blaming the wind, until the bell rang. It was a stormy night, the kind that rattled shutters and made the castle groan. Elara sat in her chamber, a candle flickering on her desk. She was reading an old book, its pages yellowed, filled with tales of stars and ancient gods who slept beyond the sky. The words felt heavy, like they carried truths she wasn't ready for. Then from deep below, a sound cut through the storm, a soft, clear ting, like a glass breaking in a distant room. She froze. Her heart thumped, loud in her ears. The wind howled, but the sound came again. Ting-ting. Slow, deliberate from the crypt. Elara grabbed her shawl and candle, the flame dancing wildly as she moved. The castle's halls were dark, the air thick with dust and memory. Stone steps spiraled down to the crypt, cold under her bare feet. The bell's chime grew louder, echoing off the walls, a song that pulled her forward. The crypt was a cavern of shadows. Tombs lined the walls, each carved with the Blackthorn name. Victor's was at the far end, a slab of marble veined with black. Above it hung the bell, small and brass, its rope disappearing into the earth. It rang as she approached, steady now, like a heartbeat. Ting, ting, ting. Victor? Her voice trembled, barely a whisper. The candle shook in her hand, casting wild shadows. The bell stopped. Silence pressed against her, heavy as the stone around her. She stepped closer, her breath shallow. The air smelled wrong, not of dust, but of something sharp, like lightning after a storm. She touched the bell. It was warm, vibrating faintly. A jolt ran through her, and her vision blurred. Images flooded her mind, stars collapsing into voids, black seas churning under alien skies, and an eye, vast, unblinking, older than time. It saw her, and she felt small, a speck in an endless night. Elara stumbled back, the candle falling. It hissed out in a puddle of wax. Darkness swallowed her, but the bell rang again, louder, urgent. She fumbled for the wall, her hands shaking. "Who's there?" she called, but no answer came. She ran back upstairs, locking the crypt door behind her. Her chamber felt no safer. The storm raged outside, and the castle seemed to pulse, alive with something she couldn't name. Sleep wouldn't come. She sat by the window, watching the moors, waiting for dawn. Morning brought no peace. The servants noticed her pale face, but said nothing. Elara returned to the crypt, sunlight spilling through a cracked window. The bell was still, the rope slack. She knelt by Victor's tomb, tracing the carved name. "What do you want?" she whispered. That night, the bell rang again. She didn't go down. Instead, she searched Victor's old study. He'd been a scholar, collecting books from far-off lands. She found one locked in a chest, its cover black leather, symbols etched into it, spirals and stars that hurt to look at. The pages were heavy, the ink seeming to shift, forming words in a language she didn't know. But as she read, her mind burned with visions, a void where gods slept, their dreams leaking into the world, hungry for life. The bell wasn't Victor's call for help. It was a beacon, a summons for something older, vaster. Victor had read this book, she realized. He'd sought knowledge beyond death and found it, but it wasn't knowledge, it was a trap. Something had entered him, used him, and now it used the bell to reach others. Days passed, and the town below the castle changed. People grew quiet, their eyes distant. Children stopped playing. Dogs howled at nothing. A farmer found his sheep dead, their bodies empty, like husks. Elara heard whispers in the market. The moors were cursed, the castle haunted. She tried to destroy the book. Fire wouldn't touch it. The pages stayed cold. She buried it in the garden, but the bell rang louder, shaking the crypt's walls. She dreamed of the eye now, watching her, its voice a low hum. "Come to us, join the eternal." Elara fought back. She read more, learning of rituals to seal the void. She gathered salt, herbs, and old charms from the village wise woman, who spoke of ancient things that walked before men. In the crypt, she drew circles around Victor's tomb, chanting words that burned her tongue. The bell screamed, a sound no metal could make. The entity came then. It rose from the tomb, not Victor, but a shadow with too many limbs, eyes like dying stars. It spoke in her mind, promising truths no human could bear. Elara held her ground, her voice steady, finishing the ritual. The shadow wailed, the castle shook, stones cracking. The bell shattered, its pieces falling like rain. Silence returned, but not peace. The castle felt empty, the moors too quiet. Elara lived on, but the dreams stayed, She saw the void, felt its pull. The entity was gone, but its echo lingered, waiting. She sealed the crypt, vowing never to return. But at night, she heard it. A faint ting, not from the crypt, but from inside her. The castle stood empty after she left. The moors reclaimed it, ivy swallowing stone. Travelers spoke of a bell ringing in the wind, calling to those who listened too long. Chapter 3. Whispers from the soil. The village of Harrowfield lay nestled in a valley, surrounded by fields that rolled like green waves under a gray sky. It was a quiet place, where folks worked hard and spoke little, their lives tied to the land. The air carried the scent of fresh earth and hay, but lately a chill lingered, even in summer. Crows gathered in the trees, watching with beady eyes, and the wind seemed to carry voices too soft to hear. Tom Barrow was a farmer, broad-shouldered and calloused from years of toil. At 40, his face was lined like the furrows he plowed, but his eyes were sharp, missing nothing. He lived alone in a small cottage, his wife gone from sickness, his son off to the city. The farm was his world, acres of wheat and barley, a few cows, and a barn that creaked in storms. He wasn't one for stories or superstition, but he knew the land held secrets. Old folk spoke of barrows, ancient mounds where strange folk were buried long before the village was born. Tom ignored such talk. The soil fed him, that was enough. One crisp morning, as the sun barely broke the mist, Tom was plowing a new field. His plow hit something hard, jarring his arms. He cursed, thinking it a rock. Kneeling, he scraped away dirt and found metal, rusted but solid. It was a bell, small enough to fit in his hand, tied to a frayed rope. The rope trailed into the earth, knotted around a chunk of rotted wood. A coffin, maybe, long buried. Tom frowned. He'd heard of safety coffins, used in old times when folks feared waking up underground. He tossed the bell into his barn, thinking to sell it for scrap. That night, the bell rang. It started soft, a faint ting from the barn, like a coin dropped on stone. Tom sat up in bed, heart thumping. The air felt heavy, pressing on his chest. He grabbed a lantern and stepped outside, the night thick with fog. The barn loomed, its door ajar. Inside, the bell hung from a beam where he'd left it, swaying gently. Ting-ting. No wind stirred the air. Tom cut the rope, letting the bell fall. It stopped ringing, but the silence was worse. He heard whispers, not words, but sounds like leaves rustling, voices overlapping, and a tongue he didn't know. They came from the ground, from the field he'd plowed. He slammed the barn door and went back to bed, telling himself it was nothing. Morning brought no comfort. The field looked wrong. Patches of wheat wilted, turning black as if burned. His cow stood still, staring at the barn. Tom checked the bell. It was still, but the rope had reknotted itself, looping around the beam. He burned the rope and buried the bell in the yard, deep as he could dig. The whispers grew louder. At night, they filled his dreams, visions of endless dark, where stars weren't stars but eyes, watching, waiting. Shapes moved in the void, vast and writhing, older than the earth. They spoke of hunger, of doors that must open. Tom woke sweating, the whispers lingering in his ears. Harrowfield changed. Crops failed across the valley. Dogs went missing, found later with empty eyes, their bodies cold. Old Meg, the village healer, muttered about curses, saying the land was angry. Tom didn't believe her, but he saw it. Shadows moving in the fields, too tall, too thin. Children stopped playing, clutching their mothers, whispering of voices, in the dirt. Tom went to the field again, shovel in hand. He dug where he'd found the bell, deeper than before. The earth was soft, warm, like it breathed. At 6 feet, he hit wood, a coffin, its lid splintered. Inside was no body, just a mass of roots, twisting like veins. They pulsed, and the whispers roared in his head, clear now. Free us. He ran, dropping the shovel. The bell was back in the barn, ringing wildly. Ting, ting, ting. The sound echoed across the valley, and the ground shook. Cracks split the field, leaking a black mist that smelled of rot and stars. Villagers gathered, faces pale. Meg tried a charm, scattering salt and herbs, but the mist swallowed her screams. Tom read old books from the village hall, dusty records of the Barrows. They spoke of a cult, long dead, who worshipped things beyond the sky. They buried their leader with a bell, not for safety, but to call their gods when the time was right. The bell was a key, the grave a lock. He tried to destroy it. Fire didn't work. The bell stayed cold. He smashed it with a hammer, but it rang louder, the sound, splitting his head. The mist grew, spreading to the village. People changed, eyes glassy, voices chanting words that burned to hear. Tom's dream showed the truth. The bell wasn't calling for rescue. It was waking something buried, something that fed on life, on souls, to open a gate to its home. He fought back. With Meg's son, Will, he gathered iron and salt, old protections, against the unknown. They circled the field, chanting prayers half remembered. The bell screamed, the ground split wider, and a shape rose, tentacles of shadow, eyes like dying suns. It spoke in Tom's mind, promising eternity in the void. Tom threw the bell into the crack, pouring salt after it. Will lit a fire, and they chanted until their throats bled. The shape wailed, the earth closed, and the bell fell silent. Harrowfield was quiet again, but the fields stayed barren. Villagers looked at Tom with fear, blaming him for waking the horror. He left the cottage, moving to the hills, but the whispers followed, soft in the wind. At night he heard a faint ting, not from the field, but from within. The gate was shut, but the lock remained, waiting for another to turn the key. Chapter 4. The Midnight Chime. The Blackwood estate loomed over the town of Greyhaven, its Gothic spires piercing the fog like needles through cloth. The mansion was a relic, its stone walls stained by time, windows like empty eyes staring at the world. Ivy choked the iron gates, and the gardens were wild, overgrown with thorns. Inside, Edward Blackwood paced, his boots echoing on marble floors. At 22, he was the last of his line, heir to a name heavy with secrets. His father, Lord Cedric, lay dying in a velvet-draped bed, his breaths shallow, his skin pale as ash. Edward's heart was heavy, not just with grief, but with dread. Cedric was a stern man, his life spent chasing wealth and power, but he feared death above all. Edward remembered his father's late-night rants, voice trembling about being buried alive. "The earth is greedy, boy," Cedric would say. "It swallows you whole, and you're trapped, awake, forever." So, when Cedric's illness worsened, Edward ordered a safety coffin. A brass bell was fixed above the grave in the family plot, a rope threaded through the soil to Cedric's wrist. If death was a mistake, the bell would ring, and Edward would come. The funeral was a quiet affair. Greyhaven's townsfolk stayed away, whispering of the Blackwood's curse. Edward stood alone by the grave, the bell glinting under a gray sky. He felt eyes on him, not from mourners, but from the shadows, the trees, the very air. That night, he slept in the mansion, the silence broken only by creaking beams and his own restless thoughts. At midnight, the bell rang. It was a single sharp ting, slicing through the dark. Edward bolted upright, heart pounding. The mansion was still, but the sound came again. Ting, ting, clear and deliberate, from the family plot beyond the garden. He grabbed a lantern, its flame flickering as he ran downstairs, his coat flapping. The night was thick with mist, the air cold and damp. The bell's chime grew frantic, ting, 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 like a plea. The family plot was a small, walled yard, ringed by twisted oaks. Cedric's grave was fresh, the earth still loose. The bell hung from a wooden post, swaying as it rang. Edward's breath caught. "Father," he whispered, voice shaking. He dropped to his knees, clawing at the dirt with bare hands. The lantern cast wild shadows, making the gravestones dance. He dug for hours, sweat mixing with mud. The coffin was oak, polished and heavy. He pried it open, heart in his throat. Inside was darkness, not Cedric, not a body, but a void, blacker than night, swirling like ink in water. A cold wind rushed out, smelling of ozone and decay. Edward stumbled back, the lantern falling, its glass shattering. The bell stopped, but the air hummed, alive with something vast. He ran to the mansion, locking the door. His hands shook as he lit candles, their glow weak against the dark. The house felt different. Walls seemed to lean inward, shadows stretching too long. He heard whispers, not from outside, but inside his head, soft and sharp. Come to us. See the truth. Edward searched Cedric's study, desperate for answers. He found a journal, its pages filled with his father's tight scrawl. Cedric had traveled in his youth, seeking forbidden knowledge. In a desert far away, he found a tome bound in strange leather, its words alive, shifting under his gaze. It spoke of entities beyond the stars, gods who slept in the void, waiting for a door. Cedric read too much, invited something in. The bell wasn't for safety. It was a beacon, tied to the thing that took him. Greyhaven began to change. The fog thickened, clinging to streets like a shroud. Dogs howled, then fell silent. A baker's wife vanished, found days later wandering, her eyes empty, muttering about endless skies. Edward heard the bell again, night after night, though he swore he'd smashed it. The sound came from nowhere, everywhere, echoing in his bones. He tried to fight. He burned sage, scattered salt, recited prayers from old books. But the whispers grew louder, showing him visions. Stars collapsing, seas of black light, a presence that saw all, knew all, hungered for all. The journal warned of a ritual to seal the door, but it needed blood and will. Edward hesitated. His father's blood ran in him, maybe the curse too. One night the bell's chime shook the mansion, windows cracking. Edward ran to the grave again, shovel in hand. The coffin was open, the void inside pulsing, growing. A shape emerged, tall, formless, with eyes like dying embers. It spoke his name, its voice a blade in his mind. He swung the shovel, but it passed through, the air rippling. He ran to the study, grabbing the journal and a knife. The ritual demanded a sacrifice. Edward cut his palm, blood dripping onto the pages. He chanted, voice breaking. As the mansion groaned, walls bleeding black, mist. The shape followed, its presence crushing. He finished the words and the void screamed, a sound that tore at reality. The bell shattered. The grave collapsed, earth swallowing the coffin. Silence fell, heavy and wrong. Greyhaven was quiet, but the fog lingered. Edward left the mansion, unable to stay. He burned the journal, but the words stayed in his mind, whispering, of doors still waiting. At night, he heard a faint ting, not from the grave, but from within. The entity was gone, but its echo lived, watching, biding time. The mansion stood empty, its gates locked. Townsfolk avoided it, saying the bell still rang in the fog, calling to those who lingered too long. Chapter 5. Buried Secrets. The town of Wraithmoor was a forgotten speck, tucked in a valley where the sun seemed reluctant to linger. Its streets were narrow, paved with uneven stones, and its houses sagged under the weight of years. At the edge of town stood the old library, a Gothic structure of weathered brick and stained glass, its spire tipped with a rusted weather vane that groaned in the wind. Inside, Anna Whitlock spent her days, surrounded by books that smelled of dust and secrets. Anna was 28, with sharp green eyes and a mind hungry for answers. A historian by trade, she'd come to Wraithmoor to catalog the library's collection, a task few wanted. The townsfolk called her odd, always scribbling notes, chasing stories of the past. She loved the quiet of the library, the way its shadows held whispers of forgotten lives. But lately, those whispers felt real, curling around her like smoke. Her latest obsession was a box of papers from the 1800s found in the library's attic. They told of safety coffins used when cholera swept through, leaving doctors unsure of death. Families buried their loved ones with bells above the grave, ropes tied to wrists so the living could escape if they woke. Anna found the idea chilling, yet fascinating. One name appeared often: Margaret Hale, a woman buried in Wraithmoor Cemetery, her bell still standing, or so the papers claimed. One evening, as rain tapped the library's windows, Anna stayed late, poring over the papers. A sketch showed Margaret's grave, the bell drawn with strange symbols, spirals and stars that seemed to shift on the page. A note in faded ink read, "She feared not death, but what lies beyond." Anna's skin prickled. The library felt colder, the air heavy. That night, she dreamed of a vast darkness, not empty, but alive, filled with shapes that twisted like eels in a black sea. A bell rang, faint at first, then louder, pulling her deeper. She woke gasping, the sound still echoing in her ears. It wasn't a dream. The bell was real, ringing from the cemetery across town. Anna grabbed her coat and lantern, the rain soaking her as she hurried through Wraithmoor's empty streets. The cemetery was old, its iron gate rusted, gravestones tilted like broken teeth. Margaret Hale's grave was in the far corner, marked by a black stone carved with those same strange symbols. The bell hung from a wooden post, small and tarnished, swaying as it rang, ting ting, though no wind stirred the air. She touched the bell, and it stopped. Her hand burned, not with heat but with a cold that sank into her bones. Visions flashed, stars collapsing into voids, a presence watching, its hunger vast and ancient. Anna stumbled back, her lantern flickering. The ground pulsed under her feet, like a heartbeat. She returned to the library, locking the door. The papers felt heavier now, their words sharper. Margaret Hale wasn't just a woman afraid of burial. She'd been a scholar like Anna, digging into forbidden texts. One book, bound in dark leather, spoke of entities beyond the cosmos, gods who slept in the void, waiting for a call. Margaret had found it, read it, and something answered. The bell wasn't for her, it was for them. Wraithmoor began to unravel. The rain didn't stop, turning streets to mud. Crops rotted in the fields, and animals fled the valley. Townsfolk grew quiet, their eyes distant, some whispering of voices in the earth. Anna heard them too, at night, in the library, soft, insistent, promising secrets if she'd listen. She dug deeper, finding Margaret's journal in a hidden drawer. It described her fear, not of death, but of what she'd woken. The bell was a beacon, tied to the grave, meant to summon the entity when the stars aligned. Margaret tried to stop it, but died before she could. The journal ended with a warning: do not dig. The door must stay shut. Anna couldn't stop. She went back to the cemetery, shovel in hand. The bell rang louder now, shaking the ground. She dug, the earth warm and soft, like it wanted to be opened. The coffin was brittle, its lid cracked. Inside was no body, just a swirling darkness, a portal that pulsed with cold light. The whispers roared, "Join us." She ran, but the bell followed, its chime in her head. The town was changing. People vanished, others returned wrong, chanting in tongues that hurt to hear. Anna tried to fight, burning sage, drawing protective runes from the journal. But the portal grew, leaking shadows that twisted the air. She found a ritual in the journal, one Margaret never finished. It needed blood and words older than time. Anna cut her hand, chanting in the cemetery as the bell screamed. The portal wailed, a sound like stars dying, and the ground closed, swallowing the coffin. The bell fell silent, its pieces scattered. Wraithmoor was quiet but broken. Anna left, unable to stay. She burned the journal, but the words lived in her, whispering of doors still waiting. At night, she heard a faint ting, not from the grave, but from inside her. The entity was gone, but its echo lingered, watching. The library stood empty, its books untouched. Townsfolk avoided the cemetery, saying the bell still rang in the rain, calling to those who knew too much. Chapter 6. The Grave Song. The town of Mistmoor clung to the edge of a fog-choked valley, where the air was thick with damp and the stars rarely broke through. Its streets were crooked, lined with sagging houses, their windows dim like half-closed eyes. At the heart of the town stood the Starling Inn, a creaking wooden building where travelers and locals gathered, their voices blending with the clink of glasses. Among them were the Nightjars, a band of musicians known for their haunting melodies that seemed to pull at the soul. There was Lila the fiddler with hair like spun silver, Jonah the drummer, broad and quiet, and Ezra the singer, whose voice could make stones weep. They played for coin and supper, but music was their life, their way of chasing away the dark. Mistmoor had its share of stories, whispered over ale. The cemetery on the hill was one nobody liked to dwell on. It was old, older than the town, with graves so worn the names were gone. Folks said strange things happened there, lights flickering, voices in the wind. The Nightjars laughed off such tales, but Lila felt uneasy passing the cemetery, her fiddle case heavy in her hand. She'd heard something once, a note like a bell, faint but clear, calling her. One autumn evening, as fog curled through the streets, the Nightjars played at the inn. The crowd was small, faces tired from long days. Lila's fiddle sang, Jonah's drum thumped like a heart, and Ezra's voice wove them together, a song of lost love and wandering roads. Midway through, a new sound joined, a soft ting like metal on glass coming from outside. The crowd didn't notice, but Lila's bow faltered. She met Ezra's eyes and he nodded. They'd heard it before on quiet nights from the cemetery. After the set, they stepped outside, the fog swallowing the inn's light. The ting came again, steady now, from the hill. Jonah gripped his drumsticks, uneasy. Just the wind, he muttered, but the air was still. Lila felt it, a pull, like a thread tugging her heart. "We should see," she said, voice low. Ezra agreed, his face pale. They grabbed a lantern and climbed the hill, the cemetery gate looming like a jaw in the mist. The graves were silent, stones leaning in the gloom. The sound led them to a corner where a single grave stood apart, its stone black and carved with spirals that seemed to twist under the lantern's glow. A bell hung from a rusted post, small and brass, its rope trailing into the earth. It rang, ting-ting, though no hand touched it. Lila's skin prickled. "Who's buried here?" she whispered. Jonah shrugged, but Ezra knelt, reading the faded name, Amos Varn, dead a century ago. The bell's chime shifted, not just a sound but a melody, weaving into Lila's mind. It was beautiful, sad, like a song from a place no one could name. She hummed it, and Ezra joined, his voice soft. Jonah tapped his sticks, matching the rhythm. The fog thickened, the air buzzing. The melody grew, pulling at them, and they played. Lila's fiddle, Jonah's drum, Ezra's voice, right there in the cemetery, the bell leading them like a conductor. The ground trembled. The fog swirled, forming shapes, tall, thin, with eyes like dying stars. The music didn't stop. It couldn't. The shapes moved closer, their whispers joining the song, "Sing for us, open the way." Lila's hands shook, but her bow kept moving, the melody alive, unstoppable. The sky cracked, a jagged line of black light, and something vast peered through, a presence older than time, hungry for the world. Mistmoor woke to screams. The inn emptied, townsfolk running to the hill. They saw the Nightjars, still playing, their eyes glazed, the bell ringing wild. The crack in the sky grew, shadows spilling out. A farmer tried to stop them, grabbing Lila's arm, but the music burned him, his skin blistering. The townsfolk fled, locking their doors, but the song seeped through, calling them. Lila saw it in her mind. Amos Varn, a musician like them, who found a forbidden score in a forgotten book. He played it, thinking it art, but it was a summons, a key to a door beyond the stars. The bell was his, tied to his grave, meant to ring when the music woke the gods. Amos tried to stop, but the song took him, and now it took the Nightjars. They fought, inside their minds. Lila broke her bow, Jonah smashed his drum, Ezra bit his tongue to silence his voice. The bell screamed, the shapes wailed, and the crack flickered. They ran, collapsing at the inn, the music still ringing in their heads. The townsfolk burned the cemetery, salt and fire, hoping to end it. The bell fell silent. The crack closed, but Mistmore was never the same. Crops failed, children spoke of shadows, and the inn stayed empty. The nightjars left, unable to play. Lila heard the melody at night, a faint ting in her dreams, showing her the void, endless, watching. The song lived in her, waiting. She burned. Her fiddle, but the notes remained, calling her back. The cemetery was shunned, the grave untouched. On foggy nights, folks swore they heard a bell, a song weaving through the mist, searching for new players. Chapter 7. Silent. No more. In the shadow of the whispering woods, the village of Duskfall huddled, its thatched roofs and crooked chimneys bathed in perpetual twilight. The trees loomed tall, their branches knitting a canopy that choked the sunlight, leaving the air cool and heavy with the scent of moss and secrets. The villagers were a quiet lot, their lives governed by the rhythm of the seasons and the whispers of the woods, stories of things that lingered in the dark. Among them was Mira, a girl of 15, small and pale, with eyes like storm clouds. She was mute, her voice stolen by a fever when she was a child, but her hands spoke through gestures, and her gaze held a wisdom that unsettled those who met. And Mira lived with her grandmother, old Nan, in a cottage at the village's edge, where the woods crept close. Nan was the village's wise woman, brewing teas and weaving charms to keep evil at bay. She taught Mira to listen, not with ears, but with her heart, to the world's hidden songs. Mira felt the woods differently than others. She sensed a pulse in the earth, a hum in the trees, something ancient and watchful. The villagers pitied her silence, but Mira didn't mind. She saw more than they did. One evening, as the sky bled red, Mira wandered into the woods, drawn by a feeling she couldn't name. Her bare feet sank into the damp earth, leaves crunching softly. Deep in the forest, where the trees grew thick and twisted, she found a clearing. In its center lay a rusted bell, small and tarnished, half buried in roots. A frayed rope trailed from it, snaking into the ground like a vein. Mira knelt, her fingers brushing the cold metal. It vibrated, and a faint ting rang out, sharp and clear. Her heart quickened. The sound wasn't just sound, it was a warning. She tied the bell to her wrist with the rope, thinking it a treasure. That night, it rang again, unprompted, as she lay in bed. Ting-ting. The sound woke Nan, who paled when she saw the bell. "Where'd you get that, child?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Mira pointed to the woods, her hand signing the story. Nan's eyes widened. "That's no toy," she said. "It's from the old graves, the ones we don't speak of." The Whispering Woods held secrets older than Duskfall. Long ago, before the village, a cult lived there, worshipping things beyond the stars. They buried their dead with bells, not for safety, but to call their gods when the time came. Nan told Mira the tale, her voice low, as if the woods listened. The bell was dangerous, tied to a grave that wasn't empty. The bell rang every night, soft at first, then louder, its chime cutting through Mira's dreams. She saw a vast darkness, not empty, but alive, filled with shapes that writhed like smoke, their eyes countless and unblinking. They whispered, not in words, but in feelings, hunger, patience, a promise of truth. Mira woke sweating, the bell on her wrist warm, its rope tightening like a living thing. Duskfall began to change. The woods grew restless, branches snapping without wind. Birds fled, leaving the trees silent. Villagers heard whispers, not from the air but the ground, urging them to dig, to listen. A shepherd's flock vanished, found days later, hollow-eyed, and still. Mira's bell rang in the day now, its chime a warning only she understood. She signed to Nan, frantic. Something's coming. Nan gathered the village elders, telling them of the cult and the bell. They scoffed, calling it old wives' tales, but Mira saw fear in their eyes. She led Nan to the clearing, the bell ringing. Wildly. The ground was soft, pulsing. They dug, Mira's hands blistered, Nan chanting protective words. At 3 feet they found a coffin, its wood black and carved with spirals that hurt to see. The bell's rope led inside. They opened it. No body lay within, only a shadow, swirling like ink in water, cold and alive. The bell screamed, ting, 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 and the shadow rose, a formless thing with eyes like dying stars. It spoke in Mira's mind. Ring for us. Open the door. The woods trembled, the sky darkening, a crack forming above, leaking black light. Mira ran, the bell still tied to her wrist, its chime relentless. The village was chaos, people fleeing, some standing frozen, chanting in voices not their own. Nan tried a ritual, scattering salt and burning herbs, but the shadow grew, its whispers deafening. Mira felt it pulling her, wanting her silence, her soul. She fought back. In the cottage, she found Nan's old book, its pages brittle, filled with charms against the dark. One spoke of sealing a door with will and sacrifice. Mira couldn't speak, but her heart shouted. She cut the rope from her wrist, her blood dripping onto the bell. She smashed it with a stone, chanting in her mind, her will fierce. The shadow wailed, the crack in the sky flickered, and the ground swallowed the coffin. Silence fell, heavy and wrong. Duskfall was quiet, but the woods felt alive, watching. Mira left with Nan, unable to stay. She buried the bell's pieces, but its chime echoed in her dreams, showing her the void, endless, waiting. The shadow was gone, but its mark lingered, in her and the village. The clearing was avoided, the woods shunned. On quiet nights, villagers swore they heard a faint ting, a call from the earth, seeking someone new to answer. Chapter 8. Echoes of the Abyss. The wanderer's hope rocked gently on the dark waves of the iron sea, a vast, cold expanse where the horizon swallowed the stars. The ship was weathered, its timbers creaking under the weight of salt and time, manned by a crew of hardened sailors who knew the ocean's moods. Captain Elias Kane stood at the helm, his weathered face lit by a lantern's glow. At 45, he was a man of few words, his gray eyes sharp as the cliffs of their home port, Cold Harbor. His crew, 10 men, tough as barnacles, trusted him, through storms and squalls. But tonight, the sea felt different. The air was heavy, the waves too still, and a strange hum vibrated through the hull. They were 3 weeks from shore, hauling cargo to a distant port. The nights had grown strange, the crew muttering of dreams filled with endless dark, and eyes that watched from nowhere. Elias dismissed it as fatigue, but he felt it too, a pull like a hook in his chest, drawing his gaze to the water. Last night, young Tom, the cabin boy, swore he heard a sound from below, a faint ting, like a bell struck far beneath the waves. The crew laughed, but their eyes were uneasy. At midnight, it came again. Ting ting, clear, sharp, rising from the depths. Elias froze, his hand on the wheel. The crew gathered, lanterns swaying, their faces pale in the moonlight. "It's nothing," grumbled old Sam, the first mate, but his voice shook. Tom pointed to the water where ripples spread, though no wind stirred. The sound grew, ting, 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 steady, like a heartbeat from the abyss. Elias ordered a dive. He was no stranger to the sea's secrets, sunken wrecks, strange fish. But this felt wrong. He and Tom donned heavy suits, their air tubes tethered to the ship. The crew lowered them into the black water, the lanterns above fading as they sank. The sea was cold, pressing against Elias like a living thing. The bell's chime echoed through the water, louder now, guiding them down. At 100 feet, they saw it. A grave, impossible but real, resting on the ocean floor. A stone slab, carved with spirals and stars that glowed faintly, pulsed with a light that wasn't light. A brass bell hung above, tethered by a rope that swayed in the current, ringing without touch. Ting, ting. The rope led into the grave, as if tied to something below. Elias's heart pounded. He signaled Tom to stay back, but the boy was transfixed, his eyes wide behind his helmet. The bell's chime was a song now, weaving into Elias's mind, promising secrets older than the sea. He saw visions, stars collapsing into voids, oceans of black light, a presence vast and hungry, watching from beyond. Tom moved closer, reaching for the bell. Elias grabbed him, but the boy's hand brushed the rope, and the chime became a scream. Bubbles erupted, the water boiling. The grave cracked, leaking a shadow that wasn't shadow, inky, alive, with eyes like dying suns. It surged upward, and Elias hauled Tom toward the surface, their air tubes tangling. The crew pulled them aboard, but the ship shook, waves rising without cause. The bell's chime followed, louder, shaking the timbers. Cold Harbor's lights were gone when they looked to the horizon. The sea churned, the sky splitting with a crack of black light. The crew screamed, some diving overboard, only to vanish in the waves. Elias found an old logbook in his cabin, its pages brittle, written by a captain long dead. It told of a cult that sailed these waters, worshipping things beyond the stars. They sank their leader's body in a grave, tied with a bell to call their gods when the time was right. The bell was a key, the grave a door. The shadow rose, a formless mass of tentacles and eyes, its voice a roar in Elias's mind. Ring for us. Open the way. The crew changed, eyes glassy, chanting in tongues that burned to hear. Tom stood frozen, humming the bell's song. Elias fought, dousing the deck with salt and oil, setting it ablaze. He cut the air tubes, hoping to sever the bell's reach, but the chime grew, shaking the stars. He tried a ritual from the logbook, scrawled in panic by the dead captain. It needed blood and will. Elias cut his hand, chanting words that tore at his throat as the shadow loomed, the crack in the sky widening. The crew wailed, some leaping into the sea, drawn to the grave. Tom broke free, diving back, his body swallowed by the dark. Elias finished the chant, blood dripping onto the deck. The shadow screamed, the bell shattered below, and the sea stilled. The crack closed, but the ship was alone, drifting in a fog that hid the stars. Elias sailed on, the only survivor, his mind heavy with the bell's echo. Cold Harbor was gone when he reached shore, the town empty, the sea too quiet. He burned the logbook, but the chime lived in him, a faint ting in his dreams, showing the abyss, endless, waiting. The grave was sealed, but its call lingered, seeking another to answer. The iron sea was shunned, ships avoiding its heart. On still nights, sailors swore they heard a bell, ringing from the depths, calling for a new crew to open the door. Chapter 9. The Hollow Choir. The village of Grim Hollow nestled in a gorge where moonlight rarely reached, its stone cottages clinging to cliffs like barnacles on a ship's hull. Shadows pooled in the streets, and the air carried a damp chill, scented with pine and decay. The church at the village's heart was ancient, its spire cracked, stained glass windows depicting saints with eyes that seemed to follow passers-by. Inside, the choir practiced nightly, their voices weaving hymns that drifted over the gorge, a fragile shield against the dark. Clara, 17, was their youngest member, her soprano clear as a bell, though her heart was heavy with doubt. Clara lived with her father, a blacksmith, in a cottage by the forge. Her mother died when she was young, leaving her with memories of lullabies and a fear of the dark. The choir was her refuge, the music a light against the gloom of Grim Hollow. But lately, the hymns felt wrong, their notes twisting in her throat. She dreamed of a vast emptiness, not sky but deeper, where shapes moved with too many limbs, their whispers promising secrets she didn't want. The other choir members, Old Widow Gray, Stern Master Hollis, Shy Beth, noticed nothing, but Clara felt it. Something watched from beyond. One frosty evening, as the choir sang in the church, a sound joined their hymn, a faint ting, like a spoon on crystal, coming from the graveyard behind the altar. Clara faltered, her voice catching. The others didn't hear, their eyes closed in devotion. The ting came again, sharper, from the oldest grave, marked by a weathered cross and a small brass bell, its rope buried in the earth. The grave belonged to Father Silas, a priest from a century ago, buried with a bell to guard against premature burial, a fear that haunted Grim Hollow in fevered times. Clara slipped out after practice, the fog thick, swallowing the church's light. The bell rang again, ting-ting, steady, pulling her to the graveyard. The cross was tilted, the ground soft, as if freshly turned. The bell hung from a post, swaying through the air was still. Clara's breath hitched. She touched the bell, and it burned cold, sending a jolt through her. Visions flooded her mind, stars dissolving into black, a void alive with eyes, a presence ancient and hungry, calling her name. She ran home, the chime echoing in her head. Her father was asleep, the forge cold. Clara lit a candle, its flame weak against the dark. The house felt alive, walls creaking, shadows stretching too long. She heard whispers, not from outside but within, urging her to sing, to join the choir. Eternal. The next day, she searched the church's records, hidden in a dusty vestry. A journal, its pages brittle, told of Father Silas, a man obsessed with truths beyond God. He found a book in the church's crypt, its pages black, symbols writhing like worms. It spoke of entities that slept in the cosmos, waiting for a song to wake them. Silas sang their hymn, thinking it salvation, but it was a summons. The bell was his, tied to his grave, meant to ring when the choir's voices aligned with the stars. Grim Hollow began to unravel. The fog grew thicker, choking the gorge. Dogs vanished, their howls cut short. Villagers heard the bell now, its chime blending with the choir's hymns, drawing them to the church. Widow Gray's eyes glazed, her voice chanting strange words. Beth stopped speaking, humming the bell's tune. Clara's dreams showed the void clearer, a choir of shadows, singing to open a door. She tried to stop the choir, begging Hollis to cancel practice, but he laughed, calling her fanciful. The bell rang louder, shaking the church's stones. Clara found Silas's book in the crypt, its pages burning her fingers. She tried to burn it, but the flames died, the book untouched. The hymns grew stronger, the choir's voices not there, own, echoing the bell's chime. One night, the church shook, windows cracking. The choir sang, their voices a hollow roar, the bell screaming, ting, ting, ting. Clara ran to the graveyard, a knife in hand, the journal's ritual her only hope. It needed blood and silence to seal the door. She cut her palm, blood dripping onto the grave, and sang a counter hymn, her voice breaking the cosmic tune. The ground split, revealing a coffin, empty but for a swirling dark, alive with eyes. A shape rose, formless, vast, its voice a blade. In her mind, sing for us. Clara held her ground, chanting, blood mixing with earth. The shape wailed, the bell shattered, and the crack in the sky closed. Silence fell, heavy and wrong. Grim Hollow was quiet, but the gorge felt alive, watching. Clara left, unable to stay. She burned the book, but its song lingered, a faint ting in her dreams, showing the void, endless, waiting. The church was abandoned, the graveyard shunned. On foggy nights, villagers swore they heard a bell, a choir's echo, calling for new voices to sing the stars awake. Chapter 10. The Keeper's Call. The town of Shadowfen lay at the edge of a marsh where reeds whispered and will-o-wisps danced in the dark. Its houses were built on stilts, their wooden frames warped by damp, windows fogged with mist. The marsh was a place of secrets, its waters black and still, hiding things no one dared name. At the town's heart stood a crumbling lighthouse, its beacon long dead, its stone walls etched with salt and time. Jonah Reed, the keeper, lived there alone, a wiry man of 30 with eyes like the sea, deep and restless. He tended the lighthouse, out of duty though its light hadn't shone in years, a relic of a time when ships braved the marsh's channels. Jonah was a solitary soul, raised in Shadowfen, where folks kept to themselves. The townspeople spoke of the marsh in hushed tones, of old graves hidden beneath the water, marked by bells that rang when the fog was thick. Jonah dismissed such tales, but he felt the marsh's weight, a pulse in the air that set his teeth on edge. At night, he dreamed of endless voids, where stars weren't stars but eyes, watching, waiting. He woke with a hum in his ears like a distant chime. One stormy night, as thunder rolled over the marsh, Jonah sat in the lighthouse, oil lamp flickering. A sound cut through the wind, a faint ting like metal struck underwater, coming from the marsh's heart. He leaned out the window, the air thick with rain and decay. The ting came again, steady, pulling at him. He grabbed his coat and lantern, descending the spiral stairs, the lighthouse groaning like a living thing. The marsh was a maze of reeds and black water, the path slick under his boots. The sound led him to a sunken clearing where a stone slab jutted from the mire, carved with spirals that seemed to move in the lantern's light. A brass bell hung from a rotted post, its rope trailing into the water. It rang, ting, ting, though no hand touched it. The name on the stone was worn, but Jonah made out Lydia Marsh, buried a century ago. His grandfather's stories came back. Lydia, a recluse who studied forbidden things, buried with a bell not for safety, but for something darker. Jonah touched the bell, and it burned cold, a jolt shooting through him. Visions flooded his mind. Stars collapsing into black, a sea of shadows writhing with limbs, a presence vast and hungry, whispering his name. He stumbled back, the lantern falling, its flame hissing in the water. The bell's chime grew, ting, 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 shaking. The marsh, the reeds bending as if bowing. He ran to the lighthouse, locking the door. The air felt heavy, the walls pulsing. Whispers followed, not from the marsh but inside his head, urging him to listen, to answer. Shadowfen began to change. The fog thickened, swallowing the town. Fish vanished from the nets, their bodies found, empty on the shore. Townsfolk grew quiet, their eyes distant, some humming a tune Jonah recognized, the bell's chime. He searched the lighthouse's attic, finding Lydia's journal, its pages damp and inked with symbols that hurt to see. She'd found a book in the marsh, its words alive, speaking of gods beyond the cosmos, waiting for a call. Lydia sought their knowledge, but they sought her soul. The bell was her creation, tied to her grave, meant to ring when the stars aligned, opening a door to the void. The bell rang nightly, louder, shaking the lighthouse. Jonah tried to destroy it, wading into the marsh with an axe, but the bell stayed whole, its chime piercing his skull. The town suffered. Children stopped speaking. Staring at the water, the baker wandered into the marsh, never seen again. Jonah's dreams showed the truth. The bell was a beacon, waking something that fed on life, eager to cross over. He found a ritual in the journal, a way to seal the door with blood and will. Jonah rode to the grave, the bell screaming, ting, ting, ting. The water churned, a shadow rising, formless with eyes like dying stars. It spoke in his mind, call for us, open the way. Jonah cut his hand, blood dripping into the marsh, chanting words that burned his tongue. The shadow wailed, the bell shattered, and the water stilled. The skies cracked, closing. Shadowfen was silent, but broken. Jonah left, unable to stay. He burned the journal, but its words lingered, a faint ting in his dreams, showing the void. Endless, waiting. The marsh was shunned, the lighthouse abandoned. On stormy nights, fishermen swore they heard a bell, ringing from the depths, seeking a new keeper to answer its call. Chapter 11. The Forgotten. Well, the hamlet of Bleakwater crouched in a hollow where the earth seemed to sigh, its cottages sagging under mossy roofs, their windows fogged with age. The land was sodden, fed by a spring that bubbled from a stone. Well, at the hamlet's edge, its waters black and cold. The well was ancient, its stones carved with symbols no one could read, and the villagers avoided it, whispering of curses that clung to its depths. Tess, a girl of 16 with tangled brown hair and eyes sharp as flint, lived with her uncle in a cottage nearby. She was a dreamer, sketching the hills and stars, but lately her drawings turned dark. Skies with too many eyes, shapes that twisted like smoke. Tess's uncle Amos was a weaver, his hands rough from years at the loom. He told her stories of Bleakwater's past, of a time when folk buried their dead with bells to guard against being buried alive. The well, he said, was older still, tied to tales of a hermit who sought truths beyond the world. Tess listened, but her dreams felt heavier, filled with a void where something vast stirred, its voice a hum she couldn't shake. One moonless night, as rain pattered on the roof, Tess heard a sound, a faint ting, like a spoon on glass, rising from the well. She slipped out barefoot, her lantern casting a weak glow. The well's stones were slick, the air thick with damp and decay. The ting came again, steady, pulling her closer. At the well's edge, she saw a brass bell, small and tarnished, hanging from a rope that vanished into the dark. It rang, ting-ting, though no wind stirred. Tess leaned over, her reflection rippling in the water below, and the bell's chime grew, a call she felt in her bones. She touched the rope and it burned cold, sending visions, stars dissolving into black, a sea of shadows alive with limbs, a presence ancient and hungry, whispering her name. Tess stumbled back, her lantern flickering. The ground pulsed, the well's water rippling as if breathing. She ran home, locking the door, but the chime followed, echoing in her head. Bleak water began to change. The spring's water turned bitter. Crops withered and crows gathered, their cries like warnings. Villagers heard the bell now, its chime soft but relentless, drawing them to the well. Amos grew quiet, his eyes distant, humming a tune Tess recognized from her dreams. She searched his attic, finding a journal bound in cracked leather, its pages filled with the hermit's scrawl. He'd found a stone tablet in the well, carved with words that spoke of gods beyond the cosmos, waiting for a call. The bell was his, tied to a grave sunk in the well's depths, meant to ring when the stars aligned, opening a door to the void. The bell rang nightly, louder, shaking the hamlet. Tess tried to cut the rope, but it reknotted itself, the bell untouched. The well's water glowed faintly, shadows moving within. Villagers changed, some vanished, others returned wrong, chanting in tongues that hurt to hear. Tess's drawings showed the void clearer, eyes watching, limbs reaching, a door cracking open. She found a ritual in the journal, a way to seal the door with blood and will. Tess climbed into the well, rope burning her hands, the bell screaming, ting, ting, ting. At the bottom, a stone slab lay submerged, carved with the same symbols. The water churned, a shadow rising, formless with eyes like dying stars. It spoke in her mind, "Ring for us. Open the way." Tess cut her palm, blood mixing with the water, chanting words that tore at her throat. The shadow wailed, the bell shattered, and the well stilled, the sky's crack closing. Bleak water was silent, but scarred. Tess left, unable to stay. She burned the journal, but its words lingered, a faint ting in her dreams, showing the void. Endless. Waiting. The well was sealed, the hamlet abandoned. On rainy nights, wanderers swore they heard a bell ringing from the depths, seeking a new hand to pull its rope. Chapter 12. The Silent Hollow. The village of Hollowmere sat in a sunken valley, where mist clung to the ground like a shroud, and the trees leaned inward, their branches knitting a ceiling that blocked the sun. The houses were old, their stone walls crumbling, roofs patched with moss. A silence hung over the place, broken only by the creak of shutters or the drip of water from eaves. At the valley's edge stood a forgotten orchard, its gnarled apple trees barren, their roots twisting into the earth like claws. There, a single grave lay hidden, marked by a weathered stone and a small brass bell, its rope buried deep. The villagers avoided it, whispering of a curse that slept in the hollow. Lena, a girl of 14 with dark curls and eyes too old for her years, lived with her aunt in a cottage by the orchard. Her parents were gone, lost to a fire when she was small, leaving her with nightmares of flame and shadow. Lena loved to wander, sketching the valley's eerie beauty, but lately her drawings turned strange. Skies filled with eyes, shapes that writhed like smoke. She felt the hollow watching, a hum in the air that stirred her blood. One stormy night, as thunder growled and rain lashed the windows, Lena heard a sound, a faint ting, like a coin on glass, coming from the orchard. She slipped out, her lantern flickering, the mist swallowing her steps. The grave was there, half hidden by roots. The bell swaying through the air was still. Its chime grew, ting-ting, clear and sharp, pulling at her heart. The stone bore no name, only symbols, spirals and stars that seemed to pulse under her lantern's glow. Lena touched the bell, and it burned cold, a jolt shooting through her. Visions flooded her mind, stars collapsing into black, a void alive, with limbs, a presence vast and hungry, whispering her name. She stumbled back, the lantern falling, its flame hissing out. The ground trembled, the bell's chime rising, ting-ting-ting like a call from below. She ran home, locking the door. But the sound followed, echoing in her skull. Hollowmere began to change. The mist thickened, choking the valley. Crops rotted, their roots black and twisted. Villagers heard the bell now, its chime soft but relentless, drawing them to the orchard. Lena's aunt grew pale, her hands trembling as she hummed a tune Lena knew from her dreams. Lena searched the cottage, finding a hidden box under the floorboards. Inside was a diary, its pages yellowed, written by a woman named Erin, a healer who lived a century ago. Erin had found a book in the orchard, its words alive, speaking of gods beyond the stars, waiting for a call. She buried it with her, tied to a bell, to wake them when the time was right. The bell rang nightly, louder, shaking the valley. Lena tried to smash it, but the metal held, its chime piercing her ears. The orchard's trees bent, their branches clawing the air. Villagers changed. Some vanished, others returned wrong, their eyes glassy, chanting words that burned to hear. Lena's drawing showed the void clearer, a gate opening, shapes reaching through. She found a ritual in the diary, a way to seal the gate with blood and will. Lena crept to the grave, the bell screaming, ting, ting, ting. The ground was soft, warm, like it breathed. She dug, her hands blistered, uncovering a coffin, its wood black and carved with symbols. Inside was no body, only a swirling dark, alive with eyes. A shape rose, formless, vast, its voice a blade in her mind. Ring for us. Open the way. Lena cut her palm, blood dripping onto the grave, chanting words that tore at her throat. The shape wailed, the bell shattered and the ground closed, swallowing the coffin. The sky's crack sealed, but Hollowmere was silent, broken. Lena left, unable to stay. She burned the diary, but its words lingered, a faint ting in her dreams, showing the void. Endless, waiting. The orchard was shunned, the grave untouched. On stormy nights, wanderers swore they heard a bell ringing from the earth, seeking a new hand to answer its call.